The concrete warehouse echoes with the sound of approaching footsteps as Vincent Moretti surveys the aftermath of another bloody raid. Bodies lie scattered across the floor, casualties of a turf war that has consumed the city's underworld for months. His men drag forward their final captive, a small girl, no more than 7 years old, clutching a torn teddy bear against her chest. Her mother's lifeless form lies nearby, another victim of the violence that defines Moretti's world. The child looks up at the feared Don with tear-filled eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Please don't hurt me. Mama's already dead." The warehouse falls silent. Moretti's soldiers expect swift, merciless justice, the same brutal efficiency that built his empire. Instead, something shifts in the hardened criminal's expression, a flicker of humanity that his men have never witnessed. What happens when a man who has forgotten how to feel meets the innocence he thought he had destroyed forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent Moretti stared down at the trembling child, his mind reeling from her words. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Around him, his men shifted nervously, hands resting on weapons, expecting the familiar pattern of violence that had defined his reign for over 2 decades. The girl's dark eyes reminded him of someone else, someone he had buried deep in his memory, along with the pain. His fingers unconsciously twisted the heavy gold ring on his right hand, the one his father had worn before the Torino family put 3 bullets in his chest when Vincent was barely older than this child. "Boss!" Marco Santangelo's gravelly voice cut through the silence. His most trusted lieutenant stood ready to carry out whatever order came next. The scar across Marco's left cheek, a souvenir from their early days together, twitched with anticipation. Vincent knelt slowly, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his broad shoulders. Up close, he could see the dried tears on Sophia's cheeks, the way her small fingers clutched the teddy bear like a lifeline. The toy was missing one button eye, and its brown fur was matted with something Vincent didn't want to identify. "What's your name, little one?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Sophia," she whispered, then louder, as if testing whether honesty would bring more pain. "Sophia Reyes." Reyes. The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. Maria Reyes had been an innocent bystander, caught in the crossfire when they'd raided the warehouse. Intelligence had indicated it was a Rossi drug operation, not a family hiding spot. The mistake gnawed at him now, watching this child who would never see her mother again. Elena Vasquez materialized at his side, her presence both comforting and challenging. As his family's advisor and the closest thing he had to a moral compass, Elena often pushed back against his more brutal instincts. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her dark suit gave her the appearance of a strict schoolmarm rather than a woman who had orchestrated some of the most sophisticated criminal operations on the East Coast. "Vincent," she said quietly, using his first name in a way that reminded him she'd known him since he was Sophia's age. "The men are watching." He knew what she meant. Every decision he made rippled through the organization. Show weakness once, and rivals would circle like sharks, scenting blood. The Rossi family had been testing his boundaries for months, looking for any sign that the great Vincent Moretti was losing his edge. But as he looked into Sophia's eyes, Vincent saw something that made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar ache. She wasn't just afraid, she was resigned to whatever came next. She had already accepted that the world was a place where mothers died, and bad men decided whether children lived or died. "Take her to the car," he said finally, standing and brushing dust from his knees. "Boss." Marco's confusion was evident. In 20 years of working together, Vincent had never shown mercy to witnesses. Loose ends got tied up permanently. "You heard me." Vincent's tone carried the authority that had built his empire. "Elena, ride with her. Make sure she's comfortable." The warehouse erupted in barely contained murmurs as his men processed this unprecedented decision. Vincent ignored their confusion, focusing instead on the way Sophia's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small but stronger than before. Vincent looked down at his father's ring, remembering the man who had taught him that strength without honor was just brutality. Before the bullets, before the blood, before Vincent had learned that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford, his father had been a different kind of man, the kind who protected children instead of orphaning them. "Somewhere safe," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. As they walked toward the warehouse exit, Vincent caught Elena's questioning look. She had been asking him for years when he would start a family, settle down, become more than just a weapon in an expensive suit. He had always dismissed such conversations, claiming his life had no room for anything soft or vulnerable. Now, with Sophia's small hand somehow finding its way into his much larger one, Vincent realized that perhaps it wasn't about having room for vulnerability, perhaps it was about making room for it. The autumn air outside felt crisp against his face as they approached the black sedan. Sophia hesitated at the car door, looking back at the warehouse where her mother lay. Can we say goodbye?" she asked. Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. Of course. The Moretti estate loomed against the evening sky like a fortress built from old money and older secrets. Wrought iron gates swung open at their approach, revealing a circular driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. Sophia pressed her face against the car window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared up at the mansion's imposing facade. Vincent watched her reaction from the corner of his eye. The three-story stone building had been designed to intimidate its Gothic revival architecture, deliberately reminiscent of the castles his grandfather had told him about in the old country. Now, seeing it through a child's eyes, it looked less majestic and more like something from a nightmare. Elena helped Sophia from the car, while Vincent stood on the front steps, studying his home with fresh perspective. The heavy oak doors, reinforced with steel plates hidden beneath the wood veneer. The windows, bulletproof glass disguised as elegant historical reproductions. Even the landscaping served dual purposes. Those beautiful hedges provided cover for his security team. "It's so big," Sophia whispered, clutching her damaged teddy bear tighter. Rosa Delacroix appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by some sixth sense. At 72, the housekeeper moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing the domestic side of Vincent's dangerous life. Her grey hair was twisted into its usual neat bun, and her dark dress seemed to absorb the evening shadows. "Mr. Vincent," she said, her slight French accent softening the formal address. Then her eyes found Sophia, and something shifted in her weathered features. "Oh, mon Dieu, what have we here?" "This is Sophia," Vincent said, his voice carefully neutral. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Rosa's eyes met his, and 30 years of unspoken communication passed between them. She had raised him after his father's death, nursing him through nightmares and teaching him to navigate a world that wanted to destroy him. If anyone could understand what he was trying to do, it would be Rosa. "Of course," she said simply. "Come, little one, you must be hungry." As they entered the foyer, Sophia's head tilted back to stare at the crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Vincent followed her gaze, remembering the first time he'd seen it as a boy. His father had lifted him up to touch the crystals, explaining how light could be broken into rainbows if you knew how to look at it properly. The memory felt like a physical blow. When had he stopped seeing rainbows in anything? Rosa led them through the main hallway, past the formal living room with its antique furniture and museum-quality paintings. Vincent's study was visible through the open doorway, his massive desk commanding the room like a general's war table. But it was the silver-framed photograph on the corner that made him pause. Isabella smiled out from the frame, her dark hair caught in a moment of laughter he could no longer quite remember. His wife had been gone for 7 years now, lost to a car accident that still felt like divine punishment for his sins. Beside her in the photo, his hand rested on her still flat belly, where their child had been growing, the child they'd lost along with her. "The blue room, I think," Rosa was saying to Elena. "It has the best morning light, and it's far enough from the main wing to be quiet." Vincent realized they were discussing sleeping arrangements for Sophia. The blue room had been intended as a nursery once, before tragedy rewrote their plans. Isabella had spent hours in that room, painting walls and arranging furniture for a baby who would never come home. Actually, he found himself saying, maybe the yellow room instead, closer to Rosa's quarters. Rosa's sharp look told him she understood. The blue room held too many ghosts. As they climbed the curved staircase, Sophia's small hand trailed along the polished banister. "Do you live here all by yourself?" she asked. The question was innocent, but it hit him with unexpected force. Yes, he lived alone in this mausoleum of memories, surrounded by ghosts and photographs of people who would never return. When had loneliness become so normal he'd stopped noticing it? "Rosa lives here too," he said, "and there are others who help take care of the house." What he didn't mention were the armed guards who patrolled the grounds, the security cameras monitoring every entrance, the reinforced panic room hidden behind his bedroom wall. Sophia would learn about those aspects of his world soon enough. The yellow guest room was warm and welcoming, with cream-colored walls and furniture that had been purchased but never used. Rosa immediately began fussing with the bedding while Elena opened curtains to let in the last of the evening light. Sophia stood in the center of the room, looking impossibly small and lost. Her torn teddy bear seemed to be her only anchor in this strange new world. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely audible. Vincent knelt down to her level, his knees protesting against the hardwood floor. "No, Sophia, I promise you, no one here will ever hurt you." She studied his face with the intensity of someone much older, as if trying to determine whether his words could be trusted. Finally, she nodded once, a tiny gesture that somehow felt like a victory. 3 days had passed since Sophia's arrival, and the mansion felt different. Vincent noticed it in small ways, the sound of bare feet padding across marble floors, the faint humming that drifted from the kitchen, where Rosa taught Sophia to help with simple tasks, the way sunlight seemed to catch dust motes dancing in previously empty rooms. He watched from the shadows of the main hallway as Sophia explored the library, her small fingers trailing along leather-bound spines that hadn't been touched in years. She moved with careful reverence, as if understanding that these books held secrets and stories beyond her current comprehension. Rosa appeared beside him, carrying a tea service with the quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable for 3 decades. "She's looking for something to read," the housekeeper observed. "Can she read?" "Quite well for her age. Her mother taught her, apparently." Rosa's voice carried a note of approval. "She asked about the children's books this morning." Vincent realized with a start that there were no children's books in his library. Everything was either classical literature, business journals, or the kind of philosophical texts that Isabella had favored. The absence felt like another failure, another reminder of the life he'd never lived. From the library came a small gasp of delight. They found Sophia standing before his desk, where she'd discovered a box of colored pencils that Isabella had left behind art supplies from her brief foray into sketching during their marriage. Scattered around the pencils were several sheets of heavy drawing paper, and Sophia had already begun working on something. "I'm sorry," she said quickly when she saw Vincent, her hand freezing over the paper. "I didn't mean to touch your things." "It's all right," Vincent heard himself say. "What are you drawing?" Sophia hesitated, then turned the paper toward him. The image was simple but powerfully expressive, a woman with long dark hair and a kind smile, drawn in careful strokes that revealed both artistic talent and deep love. Even rendered in a child's hand, the resemblance to Sophia was unmistakable. "It's my mama," Sophia said quietly. "I don't want to forget what she looked like." The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. He thought of all the photographs of Isabella scattered throughout the house, the way he'd preserved every image to fight against the natural fading of memory. This child had nothing but what she could hold in her heart and recreate with her own hands. "She's beautiful," he said, and meant it. "You're a very good artist." Sophia's face brightened for the first time since her arrival. "Mama said I got it from my papa. She said he was an artist too, before." She trailed off, the shadow of loss crossing her features again. Vincent found himself sitting in the chair across from his desk, something he never did during the day. This was his evening sanctuary, the place where he reviewed reports and made decisions that shaped his organization's future. Now it felt transformed by Sophia's presence, by the simple act of creation happening where he usually planned destruction. "Would you like to tell me about your mama?" he asked. Sophia's eyes lit up, and for the next hour, Vincent listened to stories about Maria Reyes, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to provide for her daughter, who sang lullabies in Spanish and made empanadas on Sundays, who read fairy tales every night and promised Sofia that brave princesses always found their way home. As Sofia talked, she continued drawing, adding details to her mother's portrait and starting new sketches. A small house with a flower garden, a cat named Whiskers who had disappeared when they'd moved apartments, a playground where Maria had pushed Sofia on the swings every Saturday morning. Vincent found himself oddly relaxed, watching her small hands move across the paper with confident strokes. When had he last sat in a room where someone created beauty instead of plotting violence? When had he last heard laughter that wasn't edged with fear or calculation? "Mr. Vincent," Sofia's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you sad?" The question caught him completely off guard. In his world, men didn't discuss emotions. Sadness was weakness, and weakness was death. But looking into Sofia's earnest face, he found himself considering the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Me too," she said matter-of-factly. "Rosa says it's okay to be sad sometimes. She says sad means you love something that's gone away." Rosa's wisdom, delivered through a child's innocent honesty, struck him with unexpected force. Yes, he was sad. He'd been sad for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. "Rosa is very smart," he said. Sofia nodded solemnly, then returned to her drawing. "I'm going to make you a picture too. Rosa says you don't have enough happy things in your house." Vincent watched her bent head, the way her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, and felt something long frozen begin to thaw in his chest. Perhaps Rosa was right. Perhaps his house had been missing happy things for far too long. The call came at 3 a.m, jarring Vincent from the first peaceful sleep he'd experienced in months. Marco's voice was tight with controlled fury as he delivered the news that would shatter the fragile calm that had settled over the Moretti household. "They hit the warehouse on 5th Street, Marco reported. 3 of our guys are dead, including Tommy Ritchie. The kid had a wife and baby on the way." Vincent sat on the edge of his bed, the familiar weight of violence settling back onto his shoulders like a well-worn coat. Through his bedroom door, he could hear Rosa moving quietly in the hallway, checking on Sofia, who had woken with another nightmare about her mother. "Rossi?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. Had to be. They left their calling card. Vincent's blood chilled. The Rossi family's calling card was Antonio's sick joke, a business card from his legitimate front company, always left at the scene of their attacks. But this time, Marco's description made Vincent's hands shake with rage. "It was different this time, boss. The card, it had blood on it. Fresh blood. And there was writing on the back." "What kind of writing?" "A message. Said, 'Nice pet you picked up. Would hate for something to happen to her.'" The phone nearly shattered in Vincent's grip. In one calculated move, Antonio Rossi had crossed every line that existed in their world. Families were supposed to be off-limits, children were sacred, but Antonio had never respected the old rules. And now he was making it clear that Sofia's presence in Vincent's life made her a target. "Double the security around the house," Vincent ordered, his voice deadly quiet. "No one gets within 5 blocks without us knowing about it." "And Marco?" "I want to know where Antonio is at all times." After hanging up, Vincent stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the grounds where his security team was already implementing new protocols. Motion sensor lights illuminated the perimeter, and he could see armed figures taking positions behind carefully manicured cover. His home, Sofia's sanctuary, was transforming back into the fortress it had always been. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Elena entered without waiting for permission, her face grim in the pre-dawn darkness. "I heard," she said simply. "Marco called me too." "This is my fault," Vincent said, his voice barely audible. "I brought her here, made her a target." "You saved her life," Elena corrected. "Antonio would have found a way to use her against you regardless. At least now she's protected." But Vincent wasn't sure protection was enough anymore. He thought of Sofia sleeping down the hall, clutching her repaired teddy bear and trusting that the man who had taken her from her mother's body would keep her safe. The weight of that trust felt heavier than any responsibility he'd ever carried. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Word is spreading through the other families. Some of them think you've gone soft, that taking in the girl shows weakness. The Torinos are making noise about renegotiating territory agreements." Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the familiar rage building in his chest. This was the price of mercy in his world. Every act of humanity was seen as vulnerability, every moment of softness as an invitation for attack. He had spent 20 years building a reputation so fearsome that enemies thought twice before challenging him. Now, one 7-year-old girl had unraveled decades of carefully cultivated terror. "Schedule a meeting with the family heads," he said finally. "Tomorrow night. Make it clear that anyone who mistakes compassion for weakness will learn the difference permanently." Elena nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Vincent, if you escalate this war, Sophia will be caught in the crossfire. Is that what you want?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. What did he want? For the first time in years, Vincent found himself considering a future beyond the next territorial dispute or power struggle. He thought of Sophia's drawings, her innocent questions about why he seemed so sad, her complete trust that he would protect her from the monsters in her world. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was the monster. He was the one who had created the circumstances that killed her mother, who had built a life so steeped in violence that even his attempts at redemption brought death and destruction. How could he protect her from a world he had helped create? But as the first light of dawn began to filter through his windows, Vincent made a decision that would change everything. He would not let Sophia become another casualty of his sins. Whatever it took, whatever price he had to pay, he would find a way to give her the safety and innocence that his world seemed determined to destroy, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. The music drifted through the mansion like a ghost from another time, soft and hesitant, but unmistakably beautiful. Vincent paused in the hallway outside the main salon, where dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight, streaming through tall windows. The piano had been silent for 7 years, Isabella's baby grand, that he'd kept covered in white sheets like a funeral shroud. Now Sophia sat on the bench, her small feet barely reaching the pedals, her fingers picking out a simple melody that tugged at memories Vincent had buried deep. Her concentration was absolute, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked through each note with careful precision. Rosa appeared beside him, her expression soft with understanding. "I found her here this morning," she whispered. "She asked if it would be all right to touch the keys. I told her I thought Isabella would have liked that." The melody faltered as Sophia noticed their presence, her hands freezing above the keyboard. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to close the piano lid. "I know I shouldn't have." "No," Vincent said, his voice rougher than intended. "Please, keep playing." He entered the salon slowly, as if approaching a sacred space. The room looked exactly as Isabella had left it, her sheet music still stacked on the piano, her favorite throw pillow still resting on the window seat where she'd loved to read on rainy afternoons. Vincent had preserved everything like a museum to their lost life together. Sophia's eyes followed his movement as he settled into the leather armchair that had been his designated spot during Isabella's evening practice sessions. How many hours had he spent in that chair, pretending to read business reports while actually listening to his wife play? She'd always known he was listening, would catch his eye and smile when she played his favorite pieces. "My mama taught me," Sophia said quietly, her hands resting on the keys. "She said music was like having a conversation with your feelings." The phrase was so perfectly Isabella-like that Vincent felt his breath catch. His wife had said something similar once, explaining why she needed the piano in their home. It was her way of expressing things that words couldn't capture. "What song were you playing?" he asked. "It's called Für Elise. Mama said it was written by a man who was very sad but who knew how to make sad sound beautiful." Sophia's fingers found the opening notes again, playing them with surprising grace for someone so young. Vincent recognized the piece immediately. Isabella had played it often during their courtship, her fingers dancing across the keys while he watched from this same chair, falling deeper in love with each note. She'd told him once that Beethoven had written it for a woman he couldn't have, turning his heartbreak into something timeless and perfect. She was right, Vincent said. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest sadness. Sophia nodded solemnly, then surprised him by asking, "Would you like me to play something happy instead? I know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The offer was so innocent, so purely generous, that Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. When had anyone last offered to play something just to make him happy? "I'd like that very much," he said. Sophia's face brightened as she launched into the simple children's song, her playing more confident now. The melody filled the room with a lightness it hadn't known in years, chasing away the ghosts and shadows that had lived there since Isabella's death. As she played, Vincent noticed details he'd missed before. Sophia had Rosa's natural grace with domestic tasks, but she also had an artist's sensitivity that reminded him of Isabella. The way she listened to the sound each key made, adjusting her touch to create the exact tone she wanted it, spoke to a musical intelligence that went beyond mere technical skill. "That was beautiful," he said when she finished. "Your mother taught you well. She wanted me to take real lessons, but we couldn't afford them." Sophia's voice carried no resentment, just the matter-of-fact acceptance of circumstances beyond her control. She said maybe someday, when things got better. Vincent found himself making a decision that surprised him. "Would you like to take lessons now? I could arrange for a teacher to come here." Sophia's eyes widened with pure joy, then clouded with uncertainty. "But I'm just staying here temporarily, right? Until you figure out what to do with me." The question hit him harder than any business negotiation or territorial dispute. In the week since Sophia's arrival, he'd avoided thinking about her future, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of keeping her safe and adjusting to her presence. But now, watching her hopeful face, he realized that temporary had never been the right word for what was happening between them. "We'll see," he said gently. "For now, let's focus on the music lessons. Everyone deserves to have their dreams supported." Sophia beamed and turned back to the piano, her fingers finding the melody of Für Elise again. This time, the sad beauty of Beethoven's composition seemed transformed by her playing, still melancholy, but touched with hope, as if the music itself was learning to believe in better days ahead. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at the Moretti estate on a grey Thursday morning, her presence as unassuming as Vincent had hoped. To any observer, she appeared to be simply another well-dressed professional making a house call, perhaps a private tutor or consultant. Only Vincent, Elena, and Rosa knew the true nature of her visit. Vincent watched from his study window as the slight Asian woman emerged from her modest sedan, carrying a leather briefcase and what appeared to be a children's art kit. He'd chosen Dr. Chen specifically because she specialized in childhood trauma and came highly recommended by contacts who owed him favors, discreet contacts who understood the need for absolute confidentiality. "She's here," Elena announced, appearing in his doorway with her usual efficiency. Vincent nodded, straightening his tie with uncharacteristic nervousness. He'd faced down rival family heads, federal prosecutors, and assassination attempts with steady nerves, but the prospect of having his relationship with Sophia evaluated by a professional terrified him in ways he couldn't fully understand. Sophia was in the library when Dr. Chen arrived, working on a new drawing while Rosa supervised her morning lessons. Vincent had asked Rosa to keep their routine as normal as possible, not wanting Sophia to feel like she was being scrutinized or judged. "Sophia," Vincent said gently, entering the library with Dr. Chen beside him, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Chen. She's a friend who works with children, and she thought you might like to talk with her." Sophia looked up from her, drawing another portrait of her mother, this one showing Maria reading a book, and studied Dr. Chen with the careful assessment that had become her default expression with new people. "Hello, Sophia," Dr. Chen said, her voice warm but not artificially cheerful. "Vincent told me you're quite an artist. May I see what you're working on?" Something in the doctor's tone must have reassured Sophia, because she turned the drawing around without hesitation. "It's my mama. She loved books almost as much as music." Dr. Chen examined the drawing with genuine interest, not the patronizing enthusiasm that adults sometimes showed children's artwork. "She looks like someone who was very kind. You've captured something gentle in her expression." Over the next hour, Vincent watched through the slightly open library door as Dr. Chen worked with Sophia. There were no obvious medical procedures or formal interviews, just conversation that flowed naturally around art supplies and simple questions. The doctor had brought materials that seemed designed to encourage expression: colored pencils, clay, even a small selection of children's books. What struck Vincent most was how Sophia gradually relaxed, her shoulders losing the tension she carried even during her happiest moments in the house. With Dr. Chen, she talked openly about her memories of Maria, her confusion about the night everything changed, and her fears about what would happen to her next. "Sometimes I dream that Mama comes back," Sophia confided, working a piece of clay between her small fingers. "But then I wake up and remember that she can't." "That must be very hard," Dr. Chen said simply. "What do you think your Mama would want for you now?" Sophia considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. "She'd want me to be safe, and she'd want me to keep learning things, like piano and reading. She always said learning was the one thing nobody could take away from you." After the session, Dr. Chen met privately with Vincent in his study. She settled into the chair across from his desk with professional composure, but her expression was grave. "I need to be direct with you, Mr. Moretti," she began, pulling a manila folder from her briefcase. "Sophia is displaying classic symptoms of complex trauma, hypervigilance, attachment anxiety, and what we call emotional numbing. She's learned to suppress her natural reactions because survival required her to be very, very careful about trusting adults." Vincent felt his chest tighten as Dr. Chen continued her assessment. The clinical terms made Sophia's suffering sound both more serious and more treatable than he'd understood. "However," Dr. Chen continued, "she's also showing remarkable resilience. Her ability to form attachments hasn't been completely damaged. The relationship she's developing with Rosa is particularly healthy. It's giving her a secure base from which to begin healing." "And with me?" Vincent asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Chen studied him carefully before responding. "She's clearly bonded with you, but there's also an undercurrent of fear. She wants your approval desperately, but she's also terrified of disappointing you. That suggests she's witnessed violence and understands, on some level, that you're capable of it." The words hit Vincent like physical blows. His worst fear was being confirmed. Even his attempts to be gentle and protective couldn't completely hide what he was from Sophia's perceptive eyes. "What do I do?" he asked quietly. "That depends on what you want the outcome to be," Dr. Chen replied. "If this is temporary placement until other arrangements can be made, we focus on stabilization. But if you're considering a long-term commitment to this child, then we need to address how your lifestyle impacts her sense of safety." Vincent stared at the medical file Dr. Chen placed on his desk, its contents documenting Sophia's psychological trauma in clinical detail. The papers represented more than just a diagnosis. They were evidence of the violence that had shaped her young life, violence that he had helped create. "She deserves better than this world," he said finally. "Yes," Dr. Chen agreed. "The question is, what are you prepared to do about it?" The chess set had been a gift from Vincent's father, 32 pieces carved from bone and ebony, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship that told the story of medieval warfare in miniature. Vincent had learned the game at his father's knee, absorbing lessons about strategy and patience that had served him well in both legitimate business and the darker enterprises that followed. Now he found himself setting up the board in the library, wondering if a 7-year-old possessed the attention span for chess, or if he was about to discover another way he'd failed to understand childhood. Sophia watched from her usual spot by the window, her latest drawing abandoned as curiosity got the better of her. "What's that?" she asked, sliding down from the window seat to examine the intricate pieces. "It's chess," Vincent explained, positioning the last pawn with careful precision. "It's a game about thinking ahead, making plans, and protecting the things that matter most to you." Sophia picked up the white queen, turning it over in her small hands. The piece was carved to resemble a medieval lady, her flowing robes and crowned head rendered in exquisite detail. "She's beautiful. Is she important?" "Very important," She's the most powerful piece on the board. She can move in any direction, as far as she wants. Vincent settled into his chair, gesturing for Sophia to take the seat across from him. But even though she's powerful, she still needs to be protected. Like how you protect me? The innocent question caught Vincent off guard. He'd been thinking of chess as an abstract lesson in strategy, but Sophia's mind had immediately connected it to her own experience. Everything in her world had become about protection and safety, about powerful people making decisions that affected her survival. Yes, he said quietly. Like that. Over the next hour, Vincent taught Sophia the basic movements of each piece. She was a quick learner, her artistic mind seeming to grasp the visual patterns of the game naturally. The way she studied the board reminded him of himself at her age, intense concentration, as if understanding that every decision carried weight beyond its immediate consequences. The pawns are like regular people, Sophia observed, moving one of the small pieces forward. They can only go one way, and they're not very strong by themselves. That's right, but look what happens if a pawn makes it all the way across the board, Vincent demonstrated, moving one of his pawns to the final rank. It can become anything it wants, even a queen. Sophia's eyes lit up with understanding. So even small people can become powerful if they're brave enough. Vincent felt something tighten in his chest. Without meaning to, Sophia had grasped one of chess's most profound lessons, that position and potential could transform over time, that seeming weakness could become strength under the right circumstances. Exactly, he said. Sometimes the smallest pieces change the whole game. As they played, Vincent found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Sophia's questions were thoughtful, her moves careful but creative. She wasn't just learning rules, she was thinking about possibilities, considering how each piece might work together with others to achieve larger goals. "Why do you look sad when you play?" Sophia asked during their third game, after she'd managed to capture one of his bishops with a cleverly positioned knight. The question stopped Vincent's hand halfway to his next move. "Do I look sad?" "Sometimes, like when you're thinking really hard about something that happened before." Sophia tilted her head, studying his face with the same intensity she brought to the chessboard. "Rosa says, thinking about sad things too much can make you forget about happy things that are happening right now." Rosa's wisdom, delivered through Sophia's honest observation, hit Vincent with uncomfortable accuracy. He had been thinking about the past, about playing chess with his father before violence took that relationship away, about the games he'd imagined playing with his own child before tragedy made that impossible. "Rosa is very wise," he said finally. "Sometimes I do think too much about things that can't be changed." "Maybe you should think about teaching me chess instead," Sophia suggested with 7-year-old logic. "That's happening right now, and it's not sad at all." Vincent looked across the board at this remarkable child, who somehow managed to see hope where he saw only loss, who found joy in simple moments that he'd forgotten how to appreciate. Her presence in his life was rewriting rules he'd thought were permanent, showing him possibilities he'd convinced himself no longer existed. "You're absolutely right," he said, moving his king to a safer position. "And Sophia, you're getting very good at this game." She beamed with pride, then surprised him by asking, "Will you teach me more games? Not just chess, but other things too." "What other things?" "Everything," she said with the boundless curiosity of childhood. "I want to learn everything you know." Vincent realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The private school enrollment forms lay spread across Vincent's desk like evidence of a crime he was contemplating. Street, Catherine's Academy, prestigious, secure, with a reputation for academic excellence and discretion regarding their students' family backgrounds. Elena had researched it thoroughly, noting the high walls, controlled access, and the kind of tuition that ensured the student body came from families who valued privacy. Dr. Chen had been insistent during her follow-up visit. "Sophia needs interaction with children her own age," she'd explained. "The isolation, however well-intentioned, is preventing her from developing normal social skills. She's becoming too dependent on adult approval and too comfortable with adult conversation. She needs to remember how to be a child." Vincent stared at the admission paperwork, his pen hovering over the parent divided by guardian signature line. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was trying to give Sophia a normal childhood while living a life that made normalcy impossible. "She's been asking about school," Rosa mentioned during their morning coffee ritual, settling into the chair across from his desk with the familiarity of 3 decades. "Yesterday she wanted to know why other children get to go to classes and she has to learn everything at home." "What did you tell her? That you were thinking about it?" Rosa's direct gaze carried the weight of unspoken opinions. "She's lonely, Vincent. All the piano lessons and art supplies in the world can't replace having friends her own age." Through the study window, Vincent could see Sophia in the garden, teaching herself to skip rope with a makeshift jump rope Rosa had fashioned from kitchen twine. Her solitary play highlighted everything Dr. Chen and Rosa had been telling him she needed: peers, games, the chaos and joy that came from childhood friendships. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Boss, we need to talk." Vincent gestured for him to enter, noting how Marco's eyes swept the room before settling on the school forms. His lieutenant's scarred face showed no emotion, but Vincent had known him long enough to read the tension in his shoulders. "Surveillance picked up movement around Street Catherine's," Marco reported quietly. "Antonio's people have been watching the school for 3 days. They know you've been considering it." The words hit Vincent like ice water. Of course, Antonio would have anticipated this move. The man was ruthless but not stupid. He understood that Vincent's weakness was Sophia's vulnerability, and a school represented the ultimate exposure. "How many men?" Vincent asked. "At least 6 that we've identified. Could be more." Marco moved closer to the desk, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Boss, sending her to school right now is like painting a target on her back. Antonio doesn't play by the old rules about children." Vincent set down his pen, the enrollment form suddenly feeling like a death warrant. Every choice he made for Sophia seemed to create new dangers, new ways for his enemies to use her against him. How could he give her a normal life when normal meant vulnerable? "There's something else," Marco continued reluctantly. "Word is that some of the other families are watching to see how you handle this. They think taking in the girl was a sign of weakness, and if something happens to her, it proves their point," Vincent finished. The politics of his world were as deadly as its violence. Perception shaped reality, and reality shaped survival. If Sophia died because of his sentimentality, every rival would see it as confirmation that Vincent Moretti had lost his edge. Elena entered without knocking, her timing impeccable as always. She carried her own coffee and settled into the 3rd chair with the air of someone joining a meeting already in progress. "I assume Marco told you about the surveillance," she said, glancing at the school forms. "So, what's the plan?" Vincent realized they were both waiting for him to make a decision that would affect not just Sophia's future, but the stability of his entire organization. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than it did in this moment, with a child's happiness balanced against the brutal realities of his world. "She wants to go to school," he said finally. "She wants friends, normal experiences, the chance to be just another 7-year-old girl." "And Antonio wants her dead," Marco countered bluntly. "Boss, I've been with you for 20 years. I've seen you make hard choices before. But this what?" Marco struggled for words, then settled on brutal honesty. "This is going to get her killed, and it's going to destroy you when it happens." Vincent looked at the enrollment forms again, seeing them now as Elena and Marco must a father's desperate attempt to give his daughter something he couldn't protect. The forms represented hope and naivety in equal measure, the belief that love could somehow overcome the violence that defined his world. But as he sat there, surrounded by advisors who had helped him build an empire of fear and respect, Vincent found himself thinking about Sophia's drawing of her mother, about the way she hummed while playing piano, about her innocent questions that cut straight to the heart of who he was becoming. Maybe the question wasn't whether he could protect her while giving her a normal life. Maybe the question was whether he was brave enough to find out. The morning had started with such promise. Sophia had woken early, practically vibrating with excitement about her first visit to Street Catherine's academy. Rosa had helped her choose a special outfit, a blue dress with white flowers that made her look like any other 7-year-old preparing for a school tour. Vincent had watched from his study window as she practiced introducing herself to imaginary classmates in the garden, her voice bright with anticipation. Now he knelt on the sidewalk outside the school, pressing his hands against the spreading crimson stain on Sophia's dress, his world narrowing to the sound of her frightened whimpers and the distant wail of approaching sirens. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice steady despite the rage and terror warring in his chest. "You're going to be fine." The bullet had grazed her left shoulder, a flesh wound that looked worse than it was, but the sight of her blood on the pristine blue fabric sent Vincent's vision red with murderous fury. Sophia clung to him with her uninjured arm, her face pale with shock and confusion. "Why did they shoot at us?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "I thought we were just going to see the school." Vincent's security detail had moved with professional efficiency, forming a protective perimeter while Marco barked orders into his radio. The ambush had been carefully planned, Antonio's men positioned in a stolen utility van, striking just as Vincent's car had pulled up to the school's front entrance. Only the bulletproof glass and Vincent's driver's quick reflexes had prevented a massacre. Elena appeared at his side, her face ashen as she assessed Sophia's injury. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out," she reported quietly. "The shooters got away, but we have their vehicle description. I want them found," Vincent said, his voice carrying the cold promise of retribution. "All of them." But even as he spoke the words, Vincent felt something fundamental shifting inside him. The familiar anticipation of revenge, the satisfaction that usually came with planning violent justice, felt hollow and wrong with Sophia's blood on his hands. She was hurt because of him, traumatized again because of his choices. Sophia's fingers clutched at his shirt as the paramedics took over her care. "Don't leave me," she whispered as they lifted her onto a gurney. "I won't," Vincent promised, climbing into the ambulance despite the protests of his security team. Marco would handle the crime scene, coordinate the manhunt, do all the things that Vincent usually supervised personally. But for the first time in 20 years, nothing mattered more than staying with the child who trusted him to keep her safe. At the hospital, Vincent paced the family waiting room while doctors treated Sophia's wound. The bullet had barely grazed her, requiring only cleaning and bandaging, but the psychological impact was what worried him most. Dr. Chen arrived within an hour, summoned by Rosa's frantic phone call. "How is she?" the psychologist asked, settling beside Vincent on the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "Scared, confused. She keeps asking why someone would want to hurt her." Vincent's hands shook as he reached for his coffee, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving him exhausted. She was so excited about school this morning. She had her whole introduction planned for the other children. Dr. Chen studied his face with professional assessment. "And how are you handling this?" The question caught Vincent off guard. How was he handling it? He felt like he was coming apart at the seams, like every carefully constructed wall between his professional and personal life was crumbling. "I did this to her," he said quietly. "My enemies used her to get to me, and she paid the price." "Vincent, you didn't pull that trigger." "I might as well have." He looked up as Rosa emerged from Sophia's room, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes red with unshed tears. "How is she?" "Asking for you," Rosa replied. "The doctors want to keep her overnight for observation, but physically she'll be fine." Vincent found Sophia propped up in the hospital bed, her injured arm in a sling and her torn dress replaced with a cheerful pediatric gown covered in cartoon animals. She looked impossibly small against the white hospital linens, but her eyes brightened when she saw him. "Vincent," she reached for him with her good arm. "Rosa said you were here the whole time." He took her small hand carefully, mindful of the IV line. "I promised I wouldn't leave you." Sophia studied his face with the perceptiveness that always surprised him. "You look very sad, sadder than usual." "I'm sad that you got hurt. It wasn't your fault," she said with 7-year-old certainty. "Bad people did it. You can't control bad people." Her words hit him harder than any accusation could have. Even now, bandaged and traumatized, she was trying to comfort him, to absolve him of guilt that felt like it might crush his chest. "Sophia, he said carefully. Maybe we should think about finding you a different place to live, somewhere safer, with a family who could give you a normal life. Her grip on his hand tightened, and tears filled her eyes. Are you sending me away because I got hurt? No, sweetheart. I'm thinking about it because I love you too much to keep putting you in danger. The words surprised him. He hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even realized he felt them until they were spoken. But they were true, undeniably and completely true. The adoption papers felt heavier than they should have as Dr. Chen placed them on Vincent's desk. Crisp white documents that represented salvation and heartbreak in equal measure, a legal pathway to give Sophia the normal life he couldn't provide, with a family who could love her without putting her in mortal danger. The Hendersons are good people, Dr. Chen explained, settling into the chair across from him. Tom is a high school principal. Sarah teaches 3rd grade. They've been trying to adopt for 3 years, and they specifically requested a child, Sophia's age. Vincent studied the family photograph attached to the application. The Hendersons looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for perfect adoptive parents. Warm smiles, kind eyes, the kind of suburban respectability that promised soccer practices and family vacations instead of bulletproof cars and armed bodyguards. They live in Connecticut, Doctor, Chen continued. Small town, excellent schools, close-knit community. Sophia would have everything: safety, stability, a chance to heal from her trauma in an environment that could actually support her recovery. Through his study window, Vincent could see Sophia in the garden with Rosa, her left arm still in a sling from the shooting 3 days earlier. She was trying to teach Rosa her mother's favorite song, humming the melody while Rosa listened with patient attention. The sight made Vincent's chest ache with a pain that felt deeper than any physical wound. What would the process involve? He asked, though the words felt like swallowing glass. Given the circumstances, it could be expedited. The Hendersons are pre-approved, and Sophia has no legal guardian on record since her mother's death. You could sign temporary custody over to the state, and they could place her within a week. A week. 7 days to say goodbye to the child, who had somehow become the center of his carefully ordered world. Vincent thought about Sophia's piano lessons, their chess games, the way she'd started leaving him little drawings under his coffee cup each morning. All of it would become memories, relegated to the past, like everything else he'd lost. Have you discussed this with Sophia? Dr. Chen asked gently. No. But she overheard part of a conversation yesterday. She's been withdrawn since then. That was an understatement. Sophia had barely spoken since overhearing Vincent and Elena discussing placement options. She'd stopped playing piano, abandoned her art projects, and spent most of her time sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the garden with the blank expression of someone who had learned not to hope for anything permanent. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face carefully composed but her eyes flashing with barely contained anger. May I speak with you privately, Vincent? Dr. Chen excused herself, leaving Vincent alone with the woman who had raised him, who had never hesitated to challenge his decisions when she believed he was wrong. Rosa closed the door with deliberate precision, then turned to face him with the full force of her maternal authority. Are you out of your mind? She demanded, her French accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions intensified. That child has been abandoned once already. Now you want to abandon her again. I'm trying to protect her, Vincent said, though the words sounded weak even to his own ears. You're trying to protect yourself, Rosa shot back. You're terrified of losing her the way you lost Isabella, so you're pushing her away before life can take her from you. The accusation hit Vincent like a physical blow because it contained enough truth to hurt. Yes, he was terrified. Every moment Sophia spent in his house increased the chances that Antonio or someone like him would use her to destroy him. But Rosa was right about his deeper fear. He couldn't bear the thought of loving someone completely and then watching them die because of his choices. Look at these papers, Rosa continued, snatching the adoption documents from his desk. Perfect family, perfect life, perfect safety. But what about love? What about the bond she's formed with you, with me, with this house that's become her home? She deserves better than this, Vincent said quietly. She deserves to be loved by people who love her, Rosa corrected. And right now, that's us. You think shipping her off to strangers in Connecticut is going to erase her trauma. You think she won't spend the rest of her life wondering why you gave up on her. Through the window, Vincent watched Sophia pick up a fallen leaf, examining it with the careful attention she brought to everything she encountered. Even in her current withdrawn state, she approached the world with curiosity and resilience that amazed him daily. "What if I can't keep her safe?" he asked. "What if you can?" Rosa countered. "What if the solution isn't sending her away, but changing your life enough to make it safe for her to stay?" The suggestion hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Change his life, leave the business that had defined him for 20 years, walk away from the empire he'd built with blood and determination. "You don't understand what that would mean," Vincent said. "I understand exactly what it would mean," Rosa replied firmly. "It would mean choosing love over fear. It would mean being the father she needs instead of the criminal you've become." Before Vincent could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her small face pale and serious. "Are you talking about sending me away again?" The question pierced through all of Vincent's careful rationalizations. Looking at her standing there brave and vulnerable and trying so hard to be strong, he realized that Rosa was right. He was acting out of fear, not love. The hidden basement room had been designed as a last resort, a reinforced steel box buried beneath the mansion's foundation, equipped with air filtration, emergency supplies, and communication equipment. Vincent had hoped never to use it, but Antonio's escalating attacks had left him no choice. Now, it served as Sophia's temporary prison, though he tried to frame it as protection. "It's like a secret fort," he had explained while showing her the hidden entrance behind the library bookshelf, "just until the bad men go away." But Sophia wasn't fooled by his gentle words. She understood exactly what the room represented, another place where she had to hide, another reminder that her presence in Vincent's life brought danger that required extreme measures. Vincent watched her through the security monitor in his study, his heart breaking at the sight of her small figure curled up on the room's single bed. She hadn't spoken since he'd sealed her inside 6 hours ago, hadn't touched the books or art supplies he'd provided for entertainment. She simply sat with her back against the wall, clutching her repaired teddy bear and staring at nothing. Rosa entered his study carrying a tray of Sophia's untouched dinner, her face grim with disapproval. "She won't eat," the housekeeper reported. "She asked me if this is what jail feels like." The innocent question hit Vincent harder than any business negotiation gone wrong. In trying to protect Sophia, he had created the very thing she feared most: confinement, isolation, the sense of being punished for circumstances beyond her control. "It's temporary," Vincent said, though the words felt hollow, "just until we eliminate the threat." "And how long will that take?" Rosa demanded. "Days, weeks, months. That child is not a piece of furniture you can store in a basement until it's convenient to bring her out again." Through the monitor, Vincent saw Sophia reach for the intercom button beside her bed. Her small voice filled his study through the speaker system, carrying a weight of sadness that made his chest tighten. "Vincent, are you there?" He pressed the response button. "I'm here, sweetheart. Do you need anything? Can you tell me why I have to stay down here? I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't cause any more trouble." The plea shattered something inside Vincent's chest. Sophia thought this was punishment, thought she had done something wrong to deserve imprisonment. His attempts to protect her had become another form of trauma, another betrayal by an adult she had learned to trust. "Sophia, this isn't because you did anything wrong," he said carefully. "There are some very bad men who want to hurt you to get to me. This room keeps you safe until we can make them go away." "But I heard Rosa crying," Sophia replied, her voice barely audible through the speaker. "And I heard Elena talking about funerals. Are people dying because of me?" Vincent closed his eyes, realizing that Sophia's perceptive nature meant she understood far more about the situation than he'd hoped. She knew that his war with Antonio was escalating, that bodies were accumulating in their conflict, that her presence in his life was the catalyst for violence that spread far beyond their personal relationship. "It's complicated," he said finally, hating himself for the inadequate response. "Am I ever going to be able to come out?" Sophia asked. "Am I going to spend my whole life hiding in secret rooms?" The question exposed the fundamental flaw in Vincent's thinking. Even if he defeated Antonio, there would be other enemies, other threats, other reasons why Sofia would need protection from his world. The basement room wasn't a temporary solution, it was a preview of what her life would become if she stayed with him. Marco's voice crackled through Vincent's radio, interrupting his conversation with Sofia. "Boss, we've got movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from the east." Vincent switched to the security cameras that monitored his property's exterior. Black SUVs with tinted windows moved slowly along the tree line, Antonio's signature intimidation tactic, letting Vincent know that his enemies were close and patient. "How long have they been out there?" Vincent asked. "Started about an hour ago. They're not making any aggressive moves, just watching." Vincent understood the message. Antonio wasn't planning an immediate attack, he was applying psychological pressure, reminding Vincent that Sofia's safety depended entirely on his willingness to negotiate. The basement room might protect her from bullets, but it couldn't protect her from the gradual erosion of childhood that came from living in constant fear. He looked at the adoption papers still spread across his desk, then at the monitor showing Sofia's pale face. Dr. Chen's words echoed in his memory. "Sometimes loving someone means letting them go." "Sofia," he said into the intercom, his voice gentler than he'd ever used in business negotiations. "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be very honest with me. Okay? If you could choose between staying here with me, where you might have to hide in safe rooms sometimes, or going to live with a nice family, where you could go to regular school and have friends and never worry about bad men, what would you choose?" The silence stretched so long that Vincent wondered if the intercom had malfunctioned. Finally, Sofia's voice came through, small but clear. "Would you visit me with the nice family?" Vincent's throat tightened. "It would be safer for you if I didn't." Another long silence. Then, "I don't want to be safe if it means losing you, too." The words broke Vincent's heart and filled it simultaneously. This brave, damaged child was choosing love over safety, loyalty over comfort. She was making the same impossible choice he faced, risking everything for the people who mattered most. But unlike him, she had no idea what that choice would cost. The child-sized bulletproof vest arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a specialist security company that normally equipped federal agents and military personnel. Vincent stared at the miniature piece of armor spread across his desk. Kevlar panels sewn into a bright pink fabric that tried desperately to look like regular children's clothing, but failed completely. Rosa stood in the doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled horror. "You cannot be serious." Vincent picked up the vest, surprised by its weight. The manufacturer had tried to make it appealing to children, adding cartoon butterflies to the fabric and designing the straps to look like decorative bows. But no amount of cheerful decoration could disguise what it really was, armor for a 7-year-old who lived in a war zone. "It's a precaution," Vincent said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them, "until we eliminate the threat." "Listen to yourself," Rosa snapped, entering the study and closing the door behind her. "You're talking about putting body armor on a child. A child, Vincent. This is what your life has become, a world where little girls need bulletproof clothing." Through the security monitors, Vincent could see Sofia in the garden with Elena, practicing the emergency protocols they'd implemented after the school shooting. Duck and cover, stay low, run to the nearest safe room. The sight of his advisor teaching a 7-year-old combat survival techniques made Vincent's stomach turn with self-loathing. The war with Antonio had escalated beyond anything Vincent had anticipated. 3 more of his businesses had been hit in the past week, resulting in 7 deaths and millions in damages. Antonio's men moved like ghosts through the city, striking at Vincent's operations with surgical precision before vanishing back into the shadows. But it was the psychological warfare that cut deepest. Antonio had taken to leaving children's toys at crime scenes, a doll's head in one burned-out restaurant, a broken bicycle at another. The message was clear. Sofia remained his primary target, and no amount of security could protect her indefinitely. "The vest is rated for most small arms fire," Vincent explained, trying to convince himself as much as Rosa. "It's lightweight, designed for extended wear." "Extended wear," Rosa repeated, her voice rising with indignation. You're planning to have her wear body armor every day, like it's a school uniform. Elena's voice crackled through the intercom. Vincent, we have a problem. Sophia's asking questions about the training. Vincent pressed the respond button. What kind of questions? She wants to know why she needs to practice hiding from bad men if you're so strong. She asked if you're afraid of something. The perceptiveness that Vincent had come to appreciate in Sophia now felt like a curse. She saw through every attempt to normalize the abnormal, to make security protocols seem like games rather than desperate measures against people who wanted to kill her. Marco entered without knocking, his face grim with fresh intelligence. Boss, we intercepted communications. Antonio's planning something big for this weekend. Multiple targets, coordinated strikes. What kind of targets? Unknown, but he's bringing in outside contractors, professionals who don't know about our usual security measures. Marco's eyes fell on the bulletproof vest, and his scarred face tightened with understanding. Is that for the kid? Vincent nodded, hating himself for the necessity. She can't stay in the basement forever. Actually, boss, maybe she can. Marco pulled out a tablet, showing architectural plans. I've been working with some contractors on expanding the safe room. We could build a whole underground apartment, bedroom, play area, classroom. She could live down there until this thing with Antonio is resolved. The suggestion hung in the air like a death sentence. Vincent stared at the plans, seeing Sophia's future mapped out in reinforced concrete and steel plating. A subterranean childhood lived entirely in hiding, cut off from sunlight and friendship and every normal experience that children deserved. No, he said finally. I won't bury her alive to keep her breathing. Rosa's expression softened slightly, recognizing the anguish in his voice. Then what will you do? Vincent looked at the bulletproof vest again, this ridiculous piece of protective equipment that represented everything wrong with his choices. A child should wear princess costumes and school uniforms, not military-grade armor disguised as playground clothes. I don't know, he admitted, but I know this isn't the answer. Through the window, he watched Sophia and Elena walking toward the house. The child moved with careful attention to her surroundings, checking corners and shadows the way Vincent's soldiers did on patrol. Training that should have been natural to professional killers had become survival skills for a 7-year-old. Sophia looked up at his study window and waved, her smile bright despite everything she'd endured. That simple gesture, innocent joy in the midst of calculated violence, crystallized something in Vincent's mind. He couldn't keep trying to make his dangerous world safe for Sophia. He had to make himself safe for her world. The realization terrified him more than any business rival or federal investigation ever had. It meant abandoning everything he'd built, everyone he'd been, every source of power and identity that defined him. But as he looked at the bulletproof vest designed for a child, Vincent understood that some choices weren't really choices at all. They were simply recognition of what had already become inevitable. The house key felt cold against Sophia's palm as she clutched it in her small fist, the metal warming slowly from her nervous grip. She had taken it from Rosa's key ring while the housekeeper was preparing dinner, her heart pounding with the knowledge that what she was about to do would get her in serious trouble. But trouble seemed less important than the sound she'd been hearing, Rosa's muffled sobs through her bedroom door, the hushed phone conversations that stopped whenever Sophia appeared, the way Vincent's face had looked during their last chess game. Everyone was trying to protect her from something, but Sophia understood more than they realized. She knew that people were dying because bad men wanted to hurt her. She knew that Vincent was planning something dangerous because he thought it was the only way to keep her safe. And she knew that if she didn't do something, the man who had become her whole world might disappear forever. The mansion felt different at night, shadows stretching longer and familiar rooms becoming foreign territories. Sophia had memorized the guard rotations from weeks of careful observation. She was good at being invisible when adults were talking about grown-up things. The east corridor would be empty for exactly 7 minutes, while Marcus checked the perimeter sensors and Tommy reviewed the camera feeds. She slipped out of her room barefoot, her socks muffling any sound against the marble floors. The key to the main house felt huge in her hand, though she'd watched Rosa use it countless times. Sophia had spent the afternoon practicing in her room, figuring out how to turn it without making the clicking sound that might alert the guards. The basement entrance was near Vincent's study, hidden behind the bookshelf that had become as familiar to her as her own bedroom door. She'd been through it so many times during the past week that her fingers found the release mechanism automatically. The hidden door swung open silently, revealing the staircase that led down to what everyone called her safe room, but which felt more like a beautiful cage. But Sophia wasn't heading to the basement. She was going up. Vincent's private quarters occupied the mansion's third floor, a sanctuary that Rosa had described, but which Sophia had never seen. These were the rooms where Vincent went when the weight of his responsibilities became too heavy, where he kept the things that mattered most to him, where he made the decisions that shaped everyone's lives. The key worked perfectly in the lock, and Sophia found herself in a hallway lined with portraits of people she didn't recognize. Vincent's family history rendered in oil paint and formal poses. At the end of the hall, light spilled from beneath a door that stood slightly ajar. She could hear voices inside Vincent, Elena, and Marco engaged in the kind of serious conversation that adults had when they thought children were safely asleep. Sophia pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening to words that made her stomach twist with fear. "The explosives will be delivered tomorrow," Marco was saying. "Enough to level Antonio's entire operation. We hit them all at once, the warehouse, the restaurant, the social club. No survivors, no witnesses." "Casualties?" Elena asked. "Irrelevant," Vincent replied, his voice carrying the cold authority that Sophia had never heard directed at her. "Antonio crossed the line when he targeted Sophia. Now he learns what happens when you threaten what belongs to me." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. They were planning to kill people, lots of people. The Vincent she knew, who taught her chess and listened to her play piano, was planning murders because of her. The man who had knelt beside her mother's body and promised she would be safe was about to become the kind of monster her mother had tried to protect her from. "Boss," Marco said carefully, "what about the kid when Antonio's people retaliate?" "There won't be any retaliation," Vincent interrupted. "When I'm finished, the Rossi family will be extinct." Sophia pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. This was her fault. All of it. The violence, the fear, the way Rosa cried at night when she thought no one could hear. Everything bad that was happening was because Vincent had chosen to protect her instead of letting the bad men take her that night in the warehouse. She pushed the door open and stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. The three adults turned toward her with expressions of shock and alarm. Vincent's face went pale as he realized what she had overheard. "Sophia," he said gently, rising from his chair, "what are you doing here, sweetheart? You should be in bed." "You're going to kill people because of me," she said, her voice small but steady. "You're going to become a bad man because you think it will keep me safe." The accusation hung in the room like a live grenade. Elena and Marco exchanged glances, recognizing the dangerous territory they'd entered. But Sophia's attention was focused entirely on Vincent, on the man who had saved her, and whom she was now determined to save in return. "Please don't do it," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Please don't hurt people because of me. I don't want to be the reason you become someone scary." Vincent knelt down to her level, his hands gentle as he reached for her. "Sophia, I'm trying to protect you." "But who's going to protect you?" she asked, throwing her arms around his neck. "Who's going to protect you from becoming the kind of person my mama was afraid of?" Vincent stared at his reflection in the antique mirror above his bedroom dresser, seeing a stranger looking back at him. The man in the glass had Sophia's blood on his hands, literally and figuratively. Lines of exhaustion carved deep furrows around his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance showed the strain of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. Sophia's words from the previous evening echoed in his mind. "Who's going to protect you from becoming the kind of person my mama was afraid of?" The question had shattered something fundamental in his understanding of himself. For 20 years, he'd justified every violent act as protection of his territory, his people, his interests. But now, facing the possibility of mass murder in Sophia's name, he saw himself as she must see him, a man choosing to become a monster to fight other monsters. Behind him on the dresser sat the objects that defined his identity: his father's ring, a photograph of Isabella, the silver lighter that had belonged to his grandfather. Symbols of family legacy and personal history, all connected to a world built on violence and fear. How had he convinced himself that this inheritance was something worth preserving? Elena knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, her face grave with morning intelligence reports. "Marco's men are in position," she reported. "The operation can proceed on your word." Vincent continued staring at his reflection, seeing past the surface to the man underneath. "Call it off." "Vincent?" Elena's voice carried careful surprise. "The preparations are complete. Antonio's people are vulnerable. If we wait," I said, "call it off." Vincent turned away from the mirror, no longer able to face what he saw there. "Send word to Marco. Stand down immediately." Elena closed the door behind her and approached with the caution she used around dangerous subjects. "What changed your mind?" "Sophia asked me not to become someone scary." The words sounded absurd, spoken aloud. A criminal empire's future decided by a 7-year-old's plea for his soul. But Vincent had never spoken a truer sentence. And if Antonio retaliates, if he interprets mercy as weakness? Vincent walked to his bedroom window, looking down at the garden where Sophia sat with Rosa, helping tend the flowers that had finally begun to bloom again after years of neglect. The sight of them together, child and caregiver, creating beauty in a world that seemed determined to destroy it, crystallized his decision. "Then I'll deal with Antonio, but not as a mass murderer, not as the kind of man who haunts children's nightmares." Elena studied his face with the analytical attention she brought to complex negotiations. "This isn't just about Sophia, is it? This is about who you want to be." The observation cut straight to the heart of Vincent's transformation. Yes, Sophia had been the catalyst, but the change went deeper than his love for her. She had forced him to examine the man he'd become and recognize that he didn't like what he found. "I've spent 20 years building a reputation based on fear," he said quietly. "Men obey me because they're terrified of what I might do to them. But Sophia isn't afraid of me because she sees something different, something better than what I've shown the world." "And you want to become the man she sees?" "I want to become the man she deserves to have in her life." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of what he was proposing. "This will require more than just calling off one operation. If you want to truly change your life, you'll need to dismantle everything you've built." Vincent had already been considering this possibility during his sleepless nights. Stepping away from the family business wouldn't be simple. There were territories to redistribute, alliances to honor, enemies who would see withdrawal as opportunity. But for the first time in his adult life, he wanted something more than power and respect. He wanted to be worthy of a child's trust. Rosa appeared in his doorway, her expression mixing hope with anxiety. "Sophia is asking for you," she said. "She wants to show you something in the garden." Vincent followed Rosa downstairs, finding Sophia kneeling beside a patch of earth where new tulip shoots were emerging. She looked up at him with eyes that held more wisdom than any 7-year-old should possess. "Look," she said, pointing to the green shoots. "Rosa says these were sleeping all winter, but now they're coming back to life. She says sometimes beautiful things need to hide underground for a while before they can grow into what they're supposed to be." The metaphor wasn't lost on Vincent. Sophia was describing her own journey from trauma to healing, but she was also offering him a path forward. Perhaps it wasn't too late for him to emerge from the darkness he'd inhabited for so long. "They're beautiful," he said, kneeling beside her in the dirt. "Rosa says if we take care of them, they'll bloom every spring for years and years." Sophia's voice carried the hope of someone who was learning to believe in permanent good things again. "Will you help me take care of them?" Vincent looked at this remarkable child who had somehow saved him from becoming everything he'd feared, and realized that the mirror upstairs no longer reflected a stranger. It showed a man who had chosen love over fear, growth over destruction, hope over resignation. "Yes," he said simply, "for as long as you'll let me." The teddy bear sat on Sophia's nightstand, its torn seam carefully mended with tiny, precise stitches. Rosa had worked on it for hours the previous evening, using thread that nearly matched the original brown fabric and taking care to preserve every detail that made it uniquely Sophia's. One button eye had been replaced with a slightly different shade, but somehow that imperfection made the bear more beautiful, a survivor marked by its trials, but made whole again through patient love. Vincent noticed the bear as he tucked Sophia into bed, the familiar ritual that had become the most important part of his day. Outside, his security teams maintained their vigilant watch, but inside Sophia's room, the world felt peaceful and normal in ways that Vincent was only beginning to understand. "Rosa fixed him," Sophia said, following Vincent's gaze to the bear. She said broken things can be made beautiful again if someone cares enough to put in the work. Vincent smoothed Sophia's covers, recognizing Rosa's wisdom in the simple observation. "She's right. Sometimes broken things become stronger after they're repaired." "Like us?" Sophia asked with the directness that always caught him off guard. Before Vincent could answer, the house shook with the impact of an explosion that rattled windows and triggered every security alarm simultaneously. Vincent's protective instincts kicked in immediately, his body covering Sophia's as debris rained down from the ceiling and the lights flickered ominously. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in dangerous situations. Through Sophia's window, he could see flames rising from the estate's outer perimeter. Antonio had finally made his move, bringing the war directly to Vincent's sanctuary. Marco's voice crackled through Vincent's radio. "Boss, we've got multiple breaches. They hit the front gate with explosives, and there are at least 20 men moving toward the house. We're falling back to defensive positions." Vincent helped Sophia from her bed, noting how she moved with the practiced efficiency they'd drilled into her over the past weeks. No tears, no panic, just the focused attention of someone who understood that survival required following instructions perfectly. "To the safe room?" she asked. "To the safe room," Vincent confirmed, leading her through the hallway where Rosa waited with an emergency bag and Elena coordinated security responses on multiple radio channels. But as they approached the hidden entrance to the basement sanctuary, another explosion rocked the house, this one much closer, probably the main electrical system being targeted. In the sudden darkness, Vincent heard the sound that made his blood freeze. Sophia's scream of terror as armed figures emerged from the shadows they'd infiltrated during the chaos. Antonio Rossi stepped into the hallway's emergency lighting, flanked by 3 men whose faces Vincent didn't recognize, professional killers brought in specifically for this operation. Antonio's expensive suit was immaculate, despite the violence surrounding them, and his smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had finally cornered his prey. "Vincent Moretti," Antonio said conversationally, as if they were meeting at a business lunch rather than during a home invasion. "You've been very difficult to reach lately." Vincent positioned himself between Antonio's men and Sophia, calculating distances and odds with the instinctive speed that had kept him alive through 2 decades of conflict. 3 armed professionals, limited cover, and Sophia directly behind him. The tactical situation was hopeless, but Vincent had faced impossible odds before. "Let her go," Vincent said quietly. "Your quarrel is with me." "Oh, but she's become such an important part of our relationship," Antonio replied, gesturing for his men to spread out. "The little princess who turned the great Vincent Moretti into a sentimental fool. I'm quite curious to meet her properly." Sophia's small hand found Vincent's, her grip tight with fear, but steady with trust. "Vincent," she whispered, "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart, but remember what we practiced. Whatever happens, you stay behind me." Antonio laughed, the sound echoing off the mansion's marble walls. How touching. The monster playing daddy right up until the end. Vincent felt something shift inside him as Antonio's words registered. The man had called him a monster, the same words Sophia had used when begging him not to hurt people. But standing here, facing the man who wanted to destroy everything he'd learned to love, Vincent realized that being a monster wasn't about the capacity for violence. It was about choosing to be cruel when you could choose to be kind. "You're right," Vincent said, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "I am a monster, but not the kind you think." Antonio's confident expression flickered with uncertainty as Vincent stepped forward, no longer hiding behind strategy or calculation. Sometimes, protecting what you loved required embracing exactly what you were not apologizing for it, but wielding it with precision and purpose. The real battle was about to begin. The resignation letter sat on Vincent's desk like a death certificate for the man he used to be. 3 paragraphs on expensive letterhead, formally withdrawing Vincent Moretti from all business operations of the Moretti family organization. 20 years of empire building reduced to legal language and corporate formalities, signed with the same fountain pen he'd used to authorize countless acts of violence. Elena read through the document one final time, her expression mixing relief with concern. "The other family heads will want to meet about territory redistribution," she said. "There will be questions about succession, about how your withdrawal affects existing agreements." "Marco can handle the transitions," Vincent replied, signing the letter with steady strokes. "He has the respect of the soldiers and the intelligence to avoid unnecessary conflicts." Through his study window, Vincent could see Sophia in the garden with Rosa, both of them kneeling beside the tulip beds they'd planted together. Sophia's left arm was still weak from her shoulder injury during Antonio's final assault 3 months ago, but she insisted on helping with the gardening, despite Rosa's gentle protests about letting her shoulder heal completely. The confrontation with Antonio had ended not with the massive bloodbath Vincent had planned, but with something far more devastating to his enemy's reputation: public humiliation. When Antonio had burst into the mansion expecting to find a cowering victim, he'd instead encountered Vincent at his most dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. The fight itself had been brief and brutal. Antonio's hired killers were professionals, but they were fighting for money. Vincent was fighting for love, and that desperation had made him faster, stronger, more willing to absorb damage while dealing death. When it was over, Antonio lay bleeding on Vincent's marble floor, his empire shattered and his reputation destroyed by his failure to kill one man and a child. But it was what happened next that had truly ended their war. Instead of finishing Antonio with the bullet he deserved, Vincent had let Sophia see his defeated enemy broken, pathetic, reduced to begging for mercy from the man he'd tried to destroy. In that moment, Vincent had chosen to let Sophia witness justice rather than vengeance, mercy rather than murder. "Are you having second thoughts?" Elena asked, noting the way Vincent stared at the resignation letter. "Every day," he admitted. "This life was simpler in some ways. The rules were clear, the consequences predictable. Now I'm trying to figure out how to be a father to a child who's already seen too much of what I used to be." Sophia burst through the study door with the enthusiasm that had gradually returned over the past months. Her nightmares had become less frequent, her smiles more genuine, her trust in permanent good things slowly rebuilding itself. "Vincent, come see what we planted." She grabbed his hand with dirt-stained fingers, completely unaware that she was interrupting one of the most important business meetings of his former life. "Rosa says the sunflowers will grow taller than me." Vincent allowed himself to be pulled toward the door, pausing only to hand Elena the signed resignation letter. "File this with the appropriate parties," he said. "And Elena, thank you for everything." Elena nodded, understanding that this was goodbye to more than just his criminal enterprises. She was losing the Vincent Moretti who had been her closest ally and friend for 15 years. But she was also witnessing the birth of someone new, a man who chose gardening lessons over territory disputes, bedtime stories over business meetings. In the garden, Sophia showed him the neat rows of sunflower seeds they'd planted along the estate's southern wall. "Rosa says they'll be like soldiers standing guard," she explained, "but instead of being scary, they'll be beautiful." Vincent knelt beside the planted rows, imagining the wall of golden flowers that would rise here by summer's end. The symbolism wasn't lost on him, replacing armed guards with natural beauty, choosing growth over protection, trusting that love could provide security in ways that weapons never could. "They'll be magnificent," he said, and meant it. Rosa approached with glasses of lemonade and the satisfied expression of someone watching a long-term plan come to fruition. "The adoption papers came through," she mentioned casually, handing Vincent an official envelope. "You're legally her father now." Vincent accepted the documents with hands that shook slightly. Official custody had taken months to arrange, requiring the testimony of Dr. Chen and the cooperation of social services officials who understood the unusual circumstances of Sophia's placement. But now it was real legally, officially, permanently real. What does that mean? Sophia asked, looking up from her gardening with curious eyes. It means, Vincent said carefully, that you're my daughter now, forever, if you want to be. Sophia's face lit up with pure joy. Can I call you Papa? The word hit Vincent like a physical blow, carrying weight that no business negotiation or territorial agreement had ever possessed. Papa. Not Vincent, not Sir, not the careful distance that had marked their relationship during its uncertain early months. I would love that, he whispered. And for the first time in 20 years, Vincent Moretti felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The family photograph sat on the mantelpiece of their modest suburban home, capturing a moment of pure happiness that Vincent treasured more than any business victory from his former life. In the picture, he and Sophia smiled at the camera while Rosa stood behind them, her hands resting protectively on Sophia's shoulders. They looked like any other family enjoying a quiet Sunday afternoon, no hint of the violence and trauma that had brought them together, no suggestion of the empire Vincent had abandoned to create this simple, beautiful life. 6 months had passed since they'd left the mansion and everything it represented. Vincent now worked as a carpenter for a local construction company, his hands finding unexpected satisfaction in creating homes instead of destroying lives. The pay was modest compared to his former income, but watching Sophia practice piano in their small living room or helping her with homework at their kitchen table provided riches that money couldn't measure. "Papa, look!" Sophia called from the backyard, where she was teaching Whiskers, an orange tabby cat they'd rescued from the animal shelter, to chase a feather on a string. The name had been Sophia's choice, honoring the pet she'd lost when she and her mother had been forced to move apartments during their final months together. Vincent set down his morning coffee and joined her in the garden, marveling at how normal this moment felt. No security cameras, no armed guards, no bulletproof glass, just a father watching his daughter play with their cat on a peaceful Saturday morning. The simplicity of it still amazed him sometimes. "He's getting really good at catching it," Sophia announced proudly. "Rosa says he's smart for a rescue cat." Rosa had chosen to stay with them when they'd moved, refusing Vincent's offers to help her retire comfortably. "That child needs consistency," she'd declared with characteristic firmness. "And you need someone to make sure you don't burn dinner while you're learning to be a normal person." Her presence had been invaluable during the transition. While Vincent learned to navigate parent-teacher conferences and pediatrician appointments, Rosa maintained the stability that Sophia needed to continue healing from her trauma. Dr. Chen visited monthly, documenting Sophia's remarkable progress and Vincent's successful adaptation to civilian life. "The school called yesterday," Rosa mentioned, appearing in the doorway with a fresh pot of coffee. "Sophia's teacher wants to discuss her artwork." Vincent felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. School interactions still made him nervous. He worried constantly that some detail of their past would surface, that someone would recognize him from newspaper photos or television reports. But Dr. Chen had assured him that children were remarkably adaptable, and Sophia had embraced her new identity as a normal 8-year-old with impressive determination. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "More than okay," Rosa smiled. "Apparently, Sophia's been creating a series of paintings about families. Mrs. Henderson wants to submit them to a district-wide art competition." Sophia beamed with pride, then surprised Vincent by asking, "Can we put one of my paintings next to our family picture? I painted one of us in the garden, and I think it would look nice there." Vincent looked at the photograph again, seeing it through Sophia's eyes. To her, this wasn't a picture of a former crime boss who had found redemption through an orphaned child's love. It was simply a portrait of her family, the people who loved her, protected her, and helped her become the person she was meant to be. "I think that would be perfect," he said. As Sophia ran inside to get her painting, Vincent reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The warehouse where they'd first met seemed like something from another lifetime, though he could still remember every detail of that night. Sophia's torn teddy bear, her whispered plea for mercy, The way her trust had gradually transformed him from a man who inspired fear into someone worthy of a child's love. "You know," Rosa said quietly, watching Sophia through the kitchen window as she carefully selected which painting to hang, "Maria would be proud of the woman she's becoming." Vincent nodded, thinking about the mother Sophia still remembered in her prayers each night. Maria Reyes had died protecting her daughter from Vincent's world, never knowing that the man who had inadvertently orphaned Sophia would become her salvation. Sophia returned with a watercolor painting that took Vincent's breath away. It showed the three of them in their garden, surrounded by sunflowers that stretched toward a bright blue sky. But it was the expressions she'd captured that moved him most. Rosa's gentle smile, his own face relaxed with contentment, and Sophia herself looking genuinely, completely happy. "It's beautiful," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. As they hung the painting beside their family photograph, Sophia looked up at him with eyes that held no shadows of fear, no memories of violence, no doubt about her place in his heart. "I love you, Papa," she said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart," Vincent replied, pulling her close. "More than you'll ever know." For the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti understood what it meant to be truly wealthy.